Pine Ridge Hiking Clubs presents a hike talk. In this presentation, we have 3 talks. Peggy Hilliard will be talking about hiking in Italy and the Julian Alps of Slovenia. John Oyston will be talking about hiking the Laugavegur Trail in Iceland. And Jay Sherwin will be talking about day hikes in the Isle of Arran.
I'm Peggy, and I'm new to Port Hope, by the way. Well, not that new now. I moved here in 2019, end of 2019, just before the pandemic, and joined the hiking club about a year later in the middle of the pandemic. I had the pleasure of hiking the year before the pandemic hit and going to the southeastern Alps of Europe. I spent about 15 days hiking, so 20 minutes would never do it justice. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to give you an overview of the location, the types of hikes we went on, and the geography. And I've picked 2 types to show you in more detail the sort of hikes we went on. It wasn't quite Machu Picchu, but it was certainly up there in terms of good hikes. The top picture is the Dolomite Alps of Italy. It's sort of a classic. You can tell they're very jagged, irregular shapes, and they've got gray in them. Whereas the bottom, the Julian Alps, are a pinkish color. They're both limestone Alps, but the top, the Italy's Dolomites, have another mineral in them, dolomite, which is harder. And so they've kept a little bit of the height of the mountains, and as the limestone wore away, which gives a little bit more irregular shape to the mountains. We spent 7 days in Slovenia and 1 day trip up overnight to Austria, and then down to Italy for 7 days. For those of you that maybe geography's not your long suit, in Europe, here's Italy, and we were in the northeast end of Italy and the west north end of Slovenia, and just the southern bit of Austria is the area we were. The Alps that we were hiking in were way over here. The Alps are about 1,200 kilometers long, Mont Blanc being way over here. And the Dolomites, Julian Alps, and the Caravancs, which we did one little hike into that range, are much lower than the high Taurine Grossglockner that we hiked to for the 1 day we were up in Austria. That was about 38. We didn't hike to that height, but the mountain heights are about 3,800 meters in altitude, whereas Mont Blanc is about 45 to 48. I can't quite remember exactly. And these mountains over here, the ones we were hiking were, the peaks in the Julians were about 2,500 meters high, and the Dolomites, not much more, maybe 3,000, 3,200 high. So the different levels, and just to give you an idea, Mount Everest is like 9,000 high. So we weren't by any means high hiking. The other thing to note about the Dolomites and the Julian Alps is their peaks don't keep the snow in the summertime, whereas the typical Alp picture you have in mind, snow peaks all year round. Our trip was in 3 legs, so we went up to Lake Fluent Trieste and then into Bled for 6-7 days, and then one quick trip up to Austria and then down to Zapata, where we spent 7 days hiking. And the most beautiful spot of all, and if it's not on your bucket list, if you haven't been there, you should put it on your bucket list, is Lake Bled in Slovenia. It's just the color of the water, the green-blue, with mountains in the background and all sorts of places to hike in the mountains. And a little church you can take a rowboat over and go up and ring the bell, and then the castle in the background. It was just simply a wonderful home base for the 6-7 days we were there. We stayed at a small family-owned pension, and 8 families pretty much took over the whole place with all of us hikers. Just to orient you a little bit better about where we were hiking in Slovenia, here is the Julian Alps, and Bled is just here. And but most of our hikes were in the Triglav National Park. We did a day hike over through Lake Boheme and around the mountains. We did one hike up in the, excuse my pronunciation of the Slovenian words, Marčuleček Falls. And the hike I've chosen to talk about is up here in the very close to Austria and Italy off the Verchik Pass. And as you can see, the squiggly road going up here is a road that goes over the pass and down to the other side. And it was built during World War I. And they used Russian prisoners of war to build this road. There are 50 hairpin turns, all numbered, that go up to the pass. And on the way you pass a hairpin turn number 8, you pass a church that's dedicated to the prisoners, because many of them died. There was 10,000 prisoners used in the construction, and many of them died in avalanches and so on. So it was quite an interesting area. If you were to do some more hiking in the area, you'd see relics of World War I, bunkers and such. Here's a topo of our hike. We parked here at Verchik Pass in the parking lot, and we first had to ascend up to the saddle, and then across the adjacent mountain over to the ascent to Splanova Spica. Spica, it means small hill, but it might have been a small hill for Slovenia. It's not a small hill. And then we could have come back this way in a circle as they do in the summer, but winter was late leaving this year, and so these slopes were covered in snow in many places, and this was decided by our guide that this was too dangerous to do, so we came back the same way. So we ascended from the road up to the pass on a very narrow single file path that was well trodden, but certainly not groomed it was maintained but not groomed, so it was quite a lot of picking through roots and so on. But the reward when you got to the top of the saddle part was this beautiful, I knitted two pictures together here, this beautiful mountain called Prizonic Mountain. And in the mountain, it's called, I think for that reason, that here is a picture of a woman that's been engraved in the rock, or at least the rock face looks like a picture of a woman. And if you can see that, you've got better eyes than I do. However, and here's the Russian road, by the way, zipping up along here. I blew this picture up so you can actually see the picture of the woman encased in rock. And there's an old story that goes with it about how a nymph foretold that the son of a hunter was going to shoot one of their cherished animals, a chamois. And in the case of killed a messenger, the woman was imprisoned in the mountainside. So there's some stories that we got on the way up, and it was a long hike up, and with lots of loose scree and no guard. This was quite a drop. So those that were a little bit worried got help by the guide to get up and over this semi-dangerous spot. Once you got clear of that, it was pretty easy going until we got further along. Here we're up at the saddle, here in the topo map, looking at the route that was deemed to be too dangerous, as before we headed in the other direction for the small hill that we were going to. You can see the distance isn't easily seen from these photos. So this little two dots here, these are these two people that are choosing this more dangerous route. And so you can imagine the distances involved. It will help you get a bit of perspective. This is a picture in summertime. So it looks much easier in summer without the snow. The snow was very loose and icy, so it, quite dangerous. Nonetheless, we headed off in our direction, and it too was snow covered, but a little bit less of a steep incline, except there was a couple of dangerous spots. And we had to climb through rock face and over and around things. It wasn't an easy climb. I think it was rated medium. And then coming back, we got to about here, and this picture is looking at the opposite direction where we could have come or gone back, and we decided not to do that. So you can see how it would be very loose scree in the summer, but even in the winter, the snow being loose was quite dangerous. When we got near the top, there was a monument to the Russian prisoners of war, and we got to take a bit of a break and enjoy the view on this little bit of a flat spot before the summit. Whoops, went the wrong way. And then this was the view while we were having our lunch. And then climbed up to the very top. This was about 19 to nearly 2,000 meters high, this peak, right up here. And the view to the west to Italy was just spectacular. And also the view to the north to Austria was really incredible. It was a wonderful, wonderful trip, wonderful hike. On the way back, I got a photo of, again, to show you the scale of things. These two little dots are people. And this is, if I can go back to, this is over here, looking at this side. So it's looking at a different section of that route. And there's lots of snow still, as you can see. And I didn't take any more pictures until we got all the way around back to the saddle again, because someone actually fell and slipped. Their feet slipped on the icy snow. We had no icers. We didn't bring them. We didn't think in mid of June we'd need them. And someone slipped and fell and slid on their belly down, grabbing some loose trees they went by. We managed to get the person up, but it was quite a dangerous hike. I was quite amazed that it was an eye-opener. Anyway, the rest of the trip, I didn't take any more pictures. I just held onto my poles and dug them in really securely into the snow. But we did get back, all of us, and we're back now here around the saddle. And we enjoyed a nice brew when we were done. This is the group I went with, a hiking group from Toronto that Tom Fior organized. This trip, hikes every week, and he does 3 trips a year, or he did before the pandemic, taking various people from his regular hiking group. So that was the first trip, the first leg of our trip. And as I mentioned, we did go up to Austria, but the next section I'm going to talk about in detail is our Zapata and in Italy. Again, another example of Dolomites where the Dolomite and the limestone has worn away, and the Dolomites are still, the Dolomite is hardened and leaves these very irregular shapes. And the Zapata was just a lovely, lovely, beautiful village, series of villages along a pass between a valley between 2, 3, 4 mountains on all sides. There are actually 15 villages end to end, each with their own chapel and their own mayor and their own unique little look about them. And this is taken from one of the hikes up on the south-facing side of Mount Sierra. This is an example of the beautiful, beautiful houses alpine houses we saw. Another view from the valley end to end. We did 3 hikes around various spots in the valley, and then we did a hike near Cortina. Cortina is just to the west of Zapata, and it is the home of one of the areas that do World Cup skiing. We did the Passo Tre Croce. But the hike I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail is the Val Visadende and the Val Visada hike. And this is, again, a topical map to give you some reference. We started over here at the Albergue Miraval and hiked through larch forest along the side of the mountain and came down to Refugio for Mount Zovo. And then from there, we picked up Trail 169 and went up the side of the mountain to this huge, wonderful valley between the 2 mountains, Mount Sharon and Mount Danielle. Right up to this point at the very top. And this is a close-up of that part that goes up. The valley starts here, and I think it's about 5 kilometers going up, and it's about an altitude climb of about 500 meters in that distance. The travel through the larch forest was a real eye-opener. This, by the way, is an anthill, huge anthill that's been there, I was assured, for many, many years, it looks like. The forests in this national park were absolutely cleaned of all debris, no fallen over trees, anything. In fact, the previous November, they had some hurricanes go through and knocked all the trees down in quite a few areas in this village. And they had, in fact, we had to climb through, going on one of our hikes, we had to climb through some debris of trees that made it difficult. But the foresters would cut down every little bit of everything, and they would stack all of the smaller branches and all of the logs. Even the brush got stacked and piled, and it all got carted out of the forest, which would leave the forest really pristine. And they were really beautiful to hike through. When we got past the forest, the larch forest, and started up on 169, the view behind us was just spectacular. So here we're starting, we just got to the refugio that we took a little break at, and we're about ready to climb to the valley above. Here we're having a little bit of a break. And again, it was single file and quite treacherous in spots. And the treacherous spots, there was a pile up and you had to wait your turn and go very carefully across. But the view back from where we came to the Val de Vizende was just gorgeous. And you can see the village down below. Oops. And here the guide is pointing out the village below. And so we came up and through this gate and approached the big long valley, and started heading up. This is looking back. The past just disappeared as we came up and out of that valley. And looking forward, this little dot is the shepherd's cabin. It gives me an idea of the distance and the scale. And these mountains up here are called Laugavegur rocks, and the altitude of the peaks are about 2,500 meters. And here at the crest is no more than 2,000 meters. So you can see they're quite a distance. And their trails are marked like this, and so you're going along and you see a stone in the rock on the path that's marked with the trail number. And here we've come up and we're beyond the cabin, and we can't even see it anymore. And still we've got a long way to go. At this point, we're up here, and we've still got to go way up there. So I'm taking various pictures as we go along, and up now we've got to go down again and back up, and then we go up to the top up here is where we were aiming for. Now, in this picture, you can see the clouds are starting. And I'm sad to say that as we reached the top, we had to cut short our trip because it was clear that there were thunderstorms coming. And so we were given 5 minutes to get to the top if we wanted, take a couple of pictures, and then we had to just beat it down to the bottom because there was quite a lot of concern. We could hear some thunder rumbling in the distance. And so we could have carried on. There's apparently a bunker down here you can see somewhere, and there's a lot more going on if we had have been able to stay longer. This was supposed to be our lunch stop at the top, but instead we started running, walking very fastly down to the bottom. And here it started to rain as we got to the tricky bits going down to the forest. And our guides ran ahead, literally ran ahead, and ran down and got the cars and brought them up to the refugio where we had a little break so that we could get in the cars before the lightning started. And that's the end of my second part. From there, the next morning, we took a bus down to Venice and flew back from there.
So I'm going to talk about a hike that I did last summer in the Laugavegur trail in Iceland. So this is a 55-kilometer trail. People normally do as a backpacking or hut-to-hut trail. It normally takes about 4 days. So you can see from the map here, this is the whole of Iceland. Reykjavik is about there. And this is the map that we're looking at here. So the hike starts in the north at Laugavegur, and you go through these 1, 2, 3 huts, and you end up at Thorsmork. And then from there, the guidebooks say, well, while you've got there as far as Thorsmork, you might as well do this extra extension, another 30K up to the glacier, spend a night in a hut up there, and then come down to Skogar. And so that was the plan. And so this is Francis. This is one of my English hiking buddies. We've been hiking together since we were at university. And we've done hikes in Scotland, in England, in Slovenia, all over the place. And so at this stage, I could travel to Iceland and I wouldn't have to come back from quarantine when I got back to Canada. And Iceland was on the green list for people from England. And so we met up in Reykjavik airport. And we went, first of all, spent a couple of days in Reykjavik. As you can see, they've just been celebrating Gay Pride there. We wandered around these streets, got ourselves set up with some fuel for our camping stove and a few other bits and pieces like that. We wandered up to the top of the street and to the cathedral. And so from the very top of the cathedral, you can see out over the city of Reykjavik. So there's the old town, which is looking very traditional, some nice pretty colored roofs. You can see that the trees that grow there are all fairly small and stunted. And then over at the right-hand side, you can see all the condominiums and stuff that they built downtown by the waterfront, which could be Toronto or any other major city. We went down to the docks, had a little mooch around the docks. And we did some general sightseeing. So we took a bus tour for a day. And obviously Iceland is known for its geothermal activity. So we went to this spot where they had all the boiling mud pools and the smoke and all the geothermal activity. And also, if you remember, at about that time, there was a volcano that was erupting in Iceland. And so we got there. Unfortunately, it stopped erupting about 2 months before we got there. But the volcano was actually behind this hill here. And you can see how the lava has come down this side and also down this side. You can see over here, there's still some smoke arising from the lava. And then all this area at the bottom was all fresh lava that was still hot, but it wasn't moving and it wasn't glowing in the dark or anything anymore. So we then ran out of excuses. It's time to go hiking. So in Iceland, they do not mess around. So these were the warning signs we got. Unbridged rivers, easy to get lost, strong wind, hot springs, avalanches, unexpected snowfall, loose rocks, and hot steam. So that's pretty much all the things that can possibly go wrong on a trip. Also down here, you can notice this is their guide to what seasons to go in. So a full 6 months of the year are considered winter and you don't go without special equipment. There's 3 months that are considered summer. And they say you can go then, but you have to be well equipped. And we were here, we were just in the last 2 weeks of August. So we thought that would be a good time to go. So this was the first place that we camped. This was a place called Landmannalaugar, which is either bleak or incredibly beautiful, depending on what your taste in scenery is. But it was a flat valley with a river going through it and mountains all the way around. And this was a popular place for people to come for camping trips and with RVs and stuff like that. And so there was washrooms and there was a cafeteria and a few provisions like that. And the thing it was most known for is some natural hot pools. So you can just see here this hot water that's coming down out of this spring and also out of this spring. And people are just hanging out. And you can see that everybody is more or less in a line here. And that's the line between where the water is too hot at the background and too cold in the foreground. So that was a really nice place to go and warm up. So this is the next day, getting ready, just unpitching my tent. So you can see the field we were pitching on was mostly gravel, and putting everything together in my backpack. And the first half of the first day was really beautiful. So this is looking back towards the campsite. You can see we have a nice, well-trodden, well-marked trail, a nice gentle ascent, a nice marker with a nice red label on it, so we knew we were going in the right way. And for the first couple of hours, it was fantastic and beautiful. We were out on this ridge, just pootling along, going steadily upwards, but nothing too strenuous. And we got out onto the tops and we had these beautiful views. We could see miles in all directions. You could see Francis is down to his t-shirt. And we were doing really great and having a really good time. And then it got a little bit more difficult. So you can see here, there's a valley that's covered with ice and snow. And even in the middle of August, so we still have snow up here. So you had to climb down one side, go across the ice, and then come back up the other side. So we had hiking poles with us, but we didn't have any ices. But that really wasn't a problem because the place where the ice was pretty level. So it wasn't that tricky. It was just tiring going up and then down and then up the other side. And then after we'd been hiking for about 4 hours, the weather started getting worse. So you can see some clouds coming in and the visibility getting worse, and it got noticeably colder. And we started putting on more gear as Francis forging on ahead as we head to our campsite for the night. And we got there. And so this is the first place that we were supposed to camp. And it was on the very edge of the hill. It was like on the brow of a hill. It was about 500 meters higher than where we started. So that made it significantly colder. 500 meters doesn't sound much, but in Iceland, this means the wind's blowing all the way across from the Atlantic. And you can see there people have set up their tents, but they've got piles of rocks all the way around them. We were cold and wet. The forecast was 30-kilometer-an-hour winds, continuing to rain all night with a low of 4 degrees centigrade. We didn't really feel that we were quite that sort of camper. So you can see there's a little hut here. So we went and asked them if there was any chance we could stay in the hut. Normally you have to book these huts 2 years in advance, but with COVID, everything was disrupted and we were lucky enough to find places. So this is inside, so you can see it's very basic. It's bunk beds and all very utilitarian, but there was no wind, it was nice and warm, and there was an interesting bunch of people there. So this guy here was the only guy we met who was sort of our age, who was out hiking in Iceland. He was an American who said he'd spent 6 weeks solo backpacking in the Rocky Mountains. And he insisted on making sure he knew exactly who everybody was. So we found out that this lady here was from England, but she's now setting up a PhD astrophysics program in Melbourne. And this is her guide. And he's busy cooking a salmon salad, which he let me taste a sample of. And we checked out all the other people. There was some Belgian lesbian couple that had recently got married and were celebrating their honeymoon. So we got all the details of everybody. In the next morning we set off, and we set off in quite good spirits because the weather forecast was that it was going to rain for another 2 or 3 hours and then the sun was going to come out. And we were naive, we actually believed Icelandic weather forecasts. The other thing is we were going to go down 500 meters and we we're going to camp beside a lake, and there's going to be a mountain and a pretty view, and everything was going to be good. So we kept on going, and we got to this place where we got a little bit lost because we had to detour off the trail to find a safe place to cross. And then when we came back to the trail, we weren't sure whether we should turn right or left. We ended up having to get our compass out to try and work out exactly where we were going. We met another couple of hikers and they didn't seem to know where they were going either, but eventually we decided we'd all go in the same direction. And that worked out well because we ended up coming to the edge of the hill and looking down into the valley. And we looked at the view and we thought that rain is not going to stop. It's going to rain for the rest of the day. So we got down into the valley and we decided to stop for lunch. And we had about 10 minutes and we ate some chocolate and we ate some peanuts. And within 5 or 10 minutes of staying still, we got really cold. This is what I looked like at that stage. I was pretty much wet through. And then we got to Laugavegur, which is where we were supposed to camp. And that's the campsite. And you'll notice a singular absence of people camping there, because as you can tell from the raindrops on my camera, it was still raining, it was still cold and windy. And so we went to the hut and said, can we stay here? And they said, no. And we thought, oh dear. And they said, but there is another hut. It's only 3 kilometers away. You can go there and they have room for you. So we're very thankful to get some hot soup and headed on our way. And this was the next place we got lost because for some reason, they changed from red signs to blue signs, and we weren't sure whether the blue signs were taking us in the right way. So I had to get my GPS out and make sure we were going in the right direction. And we hiked for about an hour and a bit, and we got our feet wet because we found a stream, and we ended up putting both our feet in the stream. And then we were very pleased to find out these picturesque little collections of buildings in the middle of a volcanic field with mountains all around them. And so this was the Havangil hut. And I think there were maybe 30 people there. The whole place was completely crowded. Everybody had wet gear and was spreading their wet gear all over the place. But anyway, it was out of the rain, and we were able to shelter and cook some dinner. And the next morning we headed off, and we asked for the weather forecast, and they said, we think it might rain less today than it did yesterday. Sorry. So thought that's as good as we're going to get. So at this stage, we came to one of the first of the river crossings we had to do. And this one, provided you knew where to cross, wasn't too hard. It just came above your ankles. And so I just put on some water shoes and hiked across, and it was no big deal. And so that's a bit of a panorama of the view. So pretty much the whole day, we were hiking on a relatively flat road on a volcanic plain with mountains on either side of us. And so we could make some fairly fast progress. And also because we moved huts to go to Havangil, we didn't have much of a long hike that day. And it did stop raining, so we were pleased. So in 4 days of hiking, this was the nearest thing we ever came to a main road. There are a few dirt tracks in the area that they used to supply the huts, but otherwise it's pretty desolate, pretty unpopulated. I think we saw 2 farmhouses in the distance. We never saw hydro wires, we never saw anything. It's a very quiet and unspoilt part of Iceland. And the sun came out, so you got the sun on the hill there. And so we just kept on wandering past these hills. It would take us maybe half an hour, 1 hour to go from one side of these hills to the next. And then eventually we turned the corner and we came down to Emstra hut. So you can see the hut here, and you can see the glacier in the background there. So we headed down to the hut, and this was the nicest of the campsites we stayed in. You can see there's my red tent. Francis has a green one here somewhere, this one. And it's a nice sheltered spot, and there was some greenery and a little bit of a stream. And so that was quite delightful. And the sun had come out a little bit and it had stopped raining, so I was able to spread all my stuff out and try and get things clean and dry a little bit. And then near there's a thing called the Markaflot Canyon. And so we wandered there and spent about a couple of hours walking around. Nice to be out in the sunshine and without our backpacks. And it was really quite a spectacular spot. It looks like a small river now, but it's developed into a really huge gorge. And Francis kept on standing too close to the end, and I started sounding like my mother and telling him not to stay so close to the edge. Then in the morning, we made our breakfast. One of the nice things about the huts is they do have these cooking areas. And so you can shelter from the rain while you're cooking, which was very fortunate. I have to remind people, this is the second 2 weeks of August, so this should be the height of the Icelandic summer. So we set off hiking. It was going to be a longish day, it was 15K, something like that. But according to our maps, it was going to be fairly straightforward and fairly flat. And again, it's quite spectacular. You can see the glacier in the distance there. And the path actually wanders around and comes back to the canyon and catch the end of the canyon. And here you can see some bright red rocks exposed by the river. But there's a surprisingly large amount of ups and downs. So you have to go down one little ridge and then wander along and then get back up the other ridge. It wasn't bad, but we weren't expecting it, so we were a little annoyed. But there's some quite fantastic views. There's supposed to be a dragon hiding in this hill. It's quite the skyline. And then finally we came to the last challenge of this hike, crossing the one big river that you have to cross. And so this is the Belgian lesbian couple demonstrating how you're supposed to do it, stripped to their underwear and holding hands and coming across together and taking another friend with them. And this is my friend Francis demonstrating how not to do it, because pretty much as soon as I'd taken this photograph, he managed to fall in. and he ended up on all fours in the water, in about a foot of water. And I thought, I really should go and rescue him. And then I thought, if I rescue him, I'm going to fall in as well. So fortunately, he was able to clamber out and get to the other side. And I managed to get across without getting myself wet. But this was stuff that was coming almost up to your knees and flowing very fast and very cold. So we got Francis into some dry clothing, and we continued hiking for about another hour. And we made it. So this is Thorsmork. And so you can see there the signpost. We've made it 55 kilometers from Laugavegur. We did spend a little while debating whether we were going to do the extra 30K and do the 2-day trip up to the glacier and to Skogar. But I was pleased I managed to persuade Francis that that was not a good idea. So this hut was much bigger than the other ones. It had a dining area, which had a cafeteria, and you could buy hot meals and also cold beer. So that was really nice. We had a really luxurious camping site with actual grass and trees around it, and a sauna in the background. This little thing here is a sauna hut. And so we decided just to stay there for 2 days and do some day hikes, which was probably a good idea. So this is the trail we would have taken if we'd gone on to Skogar. We'd have had to cross this river, climb up onto the ridge, and then disappear up into the mist. And so looking at that, we thought that probably was a good thing not to do. So we hiked down to Laugavegur, which is one of the other huts. So a beautiful spot in a really scenic location. We went up to this little alpine meadow and looked over to this hill called Valakuna. And we climbed up to the top of Valakuna and got spectacular views down there into the valley. So you'll notice here that there is a river and a road that goes quite across the river. So you may wonder how that works. Well, that's the pedestrian bridge across the river. And because the river moves from time to time, the bridge is on big wheels. And so they can move the bridge up and down the river to the most convenient crossing spot. But we had to get back on a bus. And so we picked up the bus that took us back to Reykjavik. And that was the bus. So it was a 4-wheel drive off-road bus. And I don't think there's many buses that are capable of driving under those conditions. And it was quite exciting because you could feel the bus being lifted and taken down the river as we tried to cross. But we got across without any problems. And we had a couple more days in Reykjavik, so we did another bus tour. So this was a volcanic crater, which is very picturesque, all the green soil and the green grass and the blue water. So we hiked down into the bottom of that, went around there. And then Iceland is known for its waterfalls. This is, I think, the biggest one, called Gullfoss. And they have a nice walking trail along there. So we went there to have a look at the waterfall, which was very spectacular. And then I flew home and I got this beautiful view of Greenland from the plane flying home. So that was an added bonus. So that's my talk. And so I will stop slide sharing and I will ask Jay to do his bit.
So
Excellent.
Thank you, John and Peggy, for a pair of very interesting presentations. I was just absorbed with them, making me want to go to both the Alps of Southern Europe and to Iceland. And so my presentation tonight is day hikes on the Isle of Arran in Scotland, completed at 2 different times, 2011 and 2019. Isle of Arran is southwestern Scotland. Scotland here, Isle of Arran here, it's an island 20 kilometers long, entire peninsula here, Mull of Kintyre here over here. Access is flight to Glasgow, but an hour-long bus trip to the coast, and then a ferry trip of about an hour over to Isle of Arran. And Isle of Arran is about 5,000 inhabitants at present. And we are very fortunate to have family members that live on Arran, and they're actually joined in on this conversation tonight. It's well after midnight now over in Scotland, but our hosts were my wife's first cousin, Paul, and his wife, Sue Archer. And so they were our companions, our host, and our hiking guides, along with their dogs, Pip and Ross, a pair of cross between border collies and bearded collies, and they just wonderful companions to have on a hike. So I'm going to take you on a series of 9-day hikes, some of them quite short, all of them interesting. And I'm going to go around the Isle of Arran counterclockwise from the east coast. And the first trip was actually off the Isle of Arran to another small island. And it was necessary to kayak. Well, we kayaked over to it. And there is a ferry service in the summertime that takes you to the island, but we chose to kayak. We had a calm ride over and a rough ride back, but we managed to get back without major mishap. There's Isle of Arran, or Holy Isle in the background. And the island is about 3 kilometers long, 1 kilometer wide, and the track runs roughly around the perimeter. The near shore facing us is fairly good access there right along the shoreline. And then the path follows from the south end of the island up over these peaks back down here. And the entire island is owned by a Buddhist community, and the Buddhists have a retreat on the island, but they are very welcoming to tourists, and they have a few rules that they expect you to obey, and one of them is to not harass the feral ponies that live on the island. And there you can see my wife along the footpath along the edge of the island. And this is the south end of the island. The path comes along here and then up, 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 and it becomes quite steep. And it is, in some places, it's actually a scramble. My wife is not a really experienced hiker, but I know I myself had to scramble in places. And by scrambling, I mean using your hands as well as your feet to make the climb. But 300 meters to the top of Mullaghmore summit, and it's full 300. And the trip down a little more gentle and through a large expanse of gorse shrub that was blooming at the time, and some peat bogs. Feet a little bit wet occasionally. Now we're back onto the main island of Arran, and probably the most difficult hike of the trips was to the top of the mountain Goatfell. And so once again, we are starting at sea level, doing the full climb up to the peak, 873 meters. And it's round trip about 10 to 11 kilometers. We started out in really quite beautiful weather. And as we got through the forest and up into the moorlands and then into the rocky areas, the weather started to settle in on us, and it became windier, colder, more cloud, starting to rain. And the dog even thinks it's a little bit dismal to be looking at that. But on we went to the top, and it's really unfortunate that the day we chose to do that, we had the weather settle in on us, because from that peak, you can look southwest over the peninsula of Kintyre right through to Ireland. And I missed that view. This hike, Glen Rosa to Glen Sannox, it's 2 glens, separate valleys, separated by a pass or a ridge. And many people choose to hike up one side, down the other, and then come from the other side and just do the same on the other side of this ridge. Paul and my wife's cousin Paul and I chose to do a straight through right up here over the ridge on through into Glen Sannox. And that hike is probably the longest one that I did on the island, and it's about 14 kilometers in total. The hike up the pass is a little bit difficult. There are some areas there where you definitely have to scramble back down over these steep drops. And the dogs even found trouble there. And one of the dogs, we had to lift it down over a couple of the larger steps. Once down over the ridge, we get back into a little bit more easier going, and it is kind of a pick and choose your own path. It's not a defined path there as you're coming down off that ridge into Glen Sannox. But there, we're getting down close to the Glen Sannox, and there's an interesting feature here, this U-shaped valley created by scouring of the glaciers, the last glaciation period. And then our truck just took us down Glen Sanix, and our wives came and met us at the other end. So very interesting hike, moderate challenge. The clearances affected the population of Arran, and the tenants that lived on the land, many of them were moved out by the landowners and replaced with sheep. And this sign that I have up here in the top, it's mounted on a stone here. It's a memorial to Arran. It says veiled by Ms. Myrtle Cook. Well, and obviously her family back in the 1820s was removed from Arran and sent up to New Brunswick in Canada. So there is a short hike along the coast. It's on the northeast coast of Arran, and it's not really an improved trail, but just a few kilometers along the coast, a couple of kilometers along the coast, and we come to one of these villages that the tenants were removed from, and that's the farmstead of Laugavegur. And so all you see there, all that remains is the stone fences of the farmyard and the foundation of the homes and the farm buildings. And those people that lived there, I'm sure they had a very tough life, but they did have a beautiful view of the Firth of Clyde. Now I'm taking you up to the very north end of the Isle of Arran, and it's the Cock of Arran and the Huttons on Conformity, a feature called Huttons on Conformity. So it's once again, it's just a walk along the coast, only a couple of kilometers to the Unconformity, Huttons Unconformity and back. And you may be wondering what's so special about Huttons Unconformity. Well, at one time I was a geology student, and never a very good one. But when Paul and Sue took us to this place and told me of Huttons Unconformity, I was very excited because it was something I remembered from my geological studies. And Hutton was a geologist in the late 1700s, and he had the wonderful ability to think outside the box. And when Hutton looked at these rocks, he saw these bedding planes here. He saw sedimentary rocks that had bedding planes that were tipped up on their edge, and more sedimentary rocks here. The bedding planes were horizontal plane. And so this joint between the horizontal plane ones and the upturned bedding is what is known as unconformity. And what Hutton realized was that these rocks took an incredible amount of time to form and go from sediment laid on a beach to be compressed into rock, to be tipped up on their edge, and then for another period of it to happen sometime later. And he understood that geologic time is tremendous, and it's not just the 6,000 years that at that time was believed to be the age of the earth from biblical teachings. And so he, thinking outside the box, took out a much greater view of the length of time for earth processes to happen. And of course, his views were considered to be heresy. He was ostracized, criticized, but over time, his theories were accepted. And 30, 40 years later, Charles Darwin used this expanded view of the history of the earth to, in the theories that he developed about evolution and origin of species. So I was very excited to see this Huttons Unconformity, but my hiking companions maybe not so much. So it was decided we need to go to a pub. And a really wonderful thing about pubs in Scotland and England, I guess too, is the beer is good, but the dogs are welcomed. And a wonderful way to end off a hike, an adventure, is to sit down with a beer and just enjoy the company of your hiking companions, and some of them being dogs. In 2003, the Scottish Parliament passed an act that is nicknamed the Right to Roam Act. And what this act did was it supplied access to the privately held lands for any of the citizens of Scotland, or indeed tourists. And so in order to make it easier for the private landowners to have tourists and hikers on their property, they've certainly done a lot of work to make it easier for the hikers to get over fences. And there are some rules associated with this. One of them is that the homeowner's privacy has to be respected. You can't go camping or hiking right up around their front yard, but you can hike camp on their property. So these stiles have been constructed to protect the fences and keep the, to not depend on people for opening and closing gates and perhaps letting sheep out. But they're so considerate that they even make a little gap, a little gate for the dogs. So the dogs can go under the gate. Sheep will be able to get out, but for the hikers with dogs, they can lift up that little fence there and let the dogs under. So this hike is to a lake that's up over the other side of this ridge. And, with the opening of the lands to the hikers and tourists, some improvements of the path were made by hiking clubs and Scottish government, with support of Scottish government. And so this path here has been graveled. So you try to keep people all on the same trail. And then here you can see a series of stone steps that have been laid to help up a fairly steep climb here, all these steps way up to the ridge. And then over that ridge, we just walked into a wind tunnel, and the wind was blowing so severely that it was difficult to remain upright. And this small little lake with the beautiful white sand beach is just not tucked in at the bottom of the mountains, and for some reason it just sucked the wind in there and made a almost hurricane-like force winds. Now we're proceeding down the west side of the Isle of Arran, and there's a loop hike that takes in a couple of features: the Drumadune Basalt Bluffs and the King's Cave. And we chose to start this hike by hiking inland around a point to the King's Cave. And it's folklore says this is the cave of Robert the Bruce. And if anyone saw a movie back in the mid-90s, Mel Gibson movie about Braveheart, there was a story in there about Robert the Bruce, at the time King of Scotland. This is going back into the early 1300s, and he lost a battle in battle to the British, and he went into seclusion for the next several months, spent the winter someplace. So folklore says he spent it in this cave, and in that cave he watched a spider building a web and trying to build a web across a large gap, and the spider failed many times, but then finally succeeded. And with that, Robert took that as a sign that he must go back and lead his Scotsmen in another battle against the British. And that is indeed what he did, and the second time he was successful. So whether or not that cave was actually inhabited by Robert the Bruce for that winter in the 1320s, it certainly has been inhabited by people for long periods of time, and in the cave were many rock etchings and paintings. And so very interesting just to ramble around inside there within the daylight that comes in and see all these etchings on the rock. Back from that the King's Cave, we came along the coast, along the Drumadune Basalt Bluffs, and these basalts are of roughly the same age and genesis as the Giant's Causeway in Ireland. And it made for an interesting walk back along the coast. And the walk brought us out on a golf course, and there are many golf courses on Arran, and some of them quite unconventional. This was a 7-hole golf course, but we having the rights to roam, we could walk across this golf course just respecting the golfers. And so a fine way to finish off about a 6-kilometer round loop hike. Progressing further down the west side of Arran, the Macri Moor stone circles. And so again, another hike, not too long, a few kilometers. And we progressed along a laneway where the bluebells of Scotland were blooming, through a sheep pasture, and finally coming to the stone circles, the stone circle. And archaeologists have dated the construction of this stone circle to Bronze Age, 1800 to 1600 before Christ, BC. And other archaeological studies right in that area have shown that the area has been inhabited for as long as 10,000 years. So a tremendous history of humanity in this site. And there we are being a little bit foolish, enjoying the spirits of the Bronze Age. And the final little hike I'm speaking of is searching for the footprints of Chirotherium. And this is not so much a hike, but just a ramble around on the shoreline. Sometime not that long before our visit there was quite a severe storm and it ripped up the kelp and seaweed. And Chirotherium is a reptile that has been nicknamed the hand beast because the footprint is very much like the human hand. And this footprint dates back to pre-dinosaur. This was a precursor of the Chirotherium was species that lived prior to dinosaurs. So this footprint may be as old as 220, 250 million years old. Just incredible to think that we're seeing something that has been in the same place we are 250 million years ago. Footprints there on the beach. And as I think I said that there has been no fossils of this reptile found anywhere. So all we have is fossil tracks. And quite interesting to look at this and think that this animal walked across the beach at some point, millions of years previously. And that is the end of 9-day hikes around the Isle of Arran. I don't know if there's another area of such small size, 8 kilometers by 20 kilometers, where there are so many interesting hikes. Some of them, a significant challenge, but so many just interesting for other things, whether it be geological history, archaeological history, or just the history of the island. So I want to say thanks, and certainly because our hosts Paul and Sue are watching, I hope that I've done justice to your island, and I just say thanks to everyone. So turn it back to you, John. Hello?
Yep, hello, I'm back, hopefully.
Okay.
Okay, you need to stop sharing, please.
Okay.
Well,
Good.
thank you very much, Jay. That was excellent. I'm always intrigued by the Scottish Islands. I wish I had more time to explore them. I've seen the Isle of Skye, and I sort of looked from there to the other ones and thought it'd be great to have time and energy to see all of them. Okay, so at this stage we'll open things up to questions. So if anybody wants to unmute themselves and open up their video if they want, alternatively put anything in the chat. Meanwhile, thank you very much to Peggy and to Jay for a couple of excellent presentations. I'm glad we managed to get everything done without any big technical hitches. And so I'll open the floor to any questions.
I've got one for Jay.
Okay.
When are you coming back?
We're all coming. We're all coming.
You're all welcome.
Yeah. We got plenty more walks to do.
All right. Well, you've said that, and the hiking club may take you up on that offer. So,
Yeah.
John, I have a question for you. I was in my wife and I were in Iceland in I think it was late February, early March one year, and we really enjoyed it because of the beauty of just a totally white landscape. But we were told that we might be there at a better time because of wind, and we didn't have a lot of wind when we were there, but they said the wind can just be fierce in the summertime. So did you notice that?
Not particularly, no. I never noticed the wind in particular. I mean, particularly the one day when we hiked all day in the rain, it was somewhat windy, but it was only the sort of wind you would get on any numbers of days in the Canadian winter. So I can't say that we had any special problems with that. So I'm very jealous of Peggy's slides because I was supposed to be going to the Dolomites in the fall of 2019. I had it all organized. I had an Airbnb booked in Cortina, and I got everything planned to meet up some friends there. With COVID, it all fell through, and it doesn't look like it's going to get done again.
Never say never.
Yeah.
I had to cancel a trip I planned for the 2020 down to South Africa to hike from Johannesburg to Cape Town. But maybe eventually I'll get there.
Is that the Drakensberg Mountains, or was
I'm not quite sure. I mean, it does go up on the Tabletop Mountains.
Cool.
but I'm not sure exactly the route. I can't remember now. It was a tour group, a small tour group, one of those G-Adventure things.
Okay, well, does anybody else have any questions for any of the three of us, or have we covered all the ground that needs to be covered and you all want to go back to see who's winning the Oscars?
John, can I just make a couple of quick announcements?
Oh, yes. So, yes, you said you wanted to do that. Yeah.
All right. Well, one thing is I want to thank you very much for hosting this, and hopefully in the future, the next time we do this, we will be doing it live and not virtual. And so one of the events that I'm organizing as the president of the hiking club is the Through the Hiker's Lens photography exhibit. So because we have some avid hikers looking in tonight, I hope that you're going to be putting some pictures together for that exhibit. They must be framed, and the exhibit doesn't happen until late November, December, but I know it's you might be thinking about it this summer, getting a good picture, getting it framed, and getting it in that show. And that show is going to be this year at the Port Hope Public Library. And the second thing is we will be hiking as a group in the Canada Day Parade, and this year in Coburg. So people will plan to join us on July 1st for Canada Day hiking in the Coburg Parade. And that's all the announcements I have, John. So
Okay, fair enough. Somebody said something in the chat.
that's from
Oh, great hikes. Thanks to the presenters. Okay, thanks, Heather. Appreciate that.
Can I just say something? Can I just thank you for letting us join your talks and watch? They were all very interesting, actually, fascinating. Thank you.
No problem at all. We're very pleased to see you. And yeah, so you're actually speaking to us from the Isle of Arran at the moment?
Yes, we are. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good, excellent.
We've got Holy Isle out through the window if we could see it, but it's pitch black.
Okay. Okay, well, if nobody else has any questions or comments, then I will call the meeting to a close. And thank you all very much for showing up. Again, thanks to Peggy and Jay for their presentations. And I will see you on the hill somewhere.
Thank you all.
looking forward to it, John. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye, Paul and Sue. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Jay.
Bye, Jay.
Bye-bye.